There's something living but dying. The idea for this came about really because of a particular object that I saw in the Wellcome Trust permanent collection, and it's a wax head that has been bisected. It's of a woman. It's got very realistic human hair and she looks like she might be asleep, but then the other half of her head is a skull, and it's got sort of worms and maggots and a snake coming through. It's a classic kind of vanitas or memento mori object. I think what that object made me want to do was to understand more about vanitas and memento mori objects and paintings. And so within the object or the painting, you've got this sense of both the living and the dead. But the paintings and the objects were meant to have a function. So they were meant to make us, as we looked at them, remember that we must die, become aware of our mortality, almost contemplate our own death. Later, or other times, that became kind of overlaid with a sort of religious or moral message, which is, you know, if we remember that we'll die, we should then live a better life. But I think the remember you will die is the key element of that. So when I was thinking about what is a memento mori artwork, then it seemed that the heart of it is it's meant to make me as the viewer contemplate my own death. So I started just wondering, does it do that? Is there a way, might there be a way of making a contemporary memento mori piece? How do you do that? Well, you need to know two things. What's happening in your brain, in your being, in your body when you look at a memento mori painting, and what's happening when you contemplate death, and are there any similarities? Is there any overlap between those two states? And the scientists involved have been open to that idea that we can't easily just step back and be objective. Taking that as a starting point, what we did was design some experiments that would take place within the kind of apparatus of neuroscience. So design an experiment where I'd come in to the neuroimaging department at Aarhus, I'd go into the MRI scanner, and I'm curious, very curious to see what might be. Well, I've never seen an image of my brain, for one, so I'm very curious about that. And I'm also interested to see the first stage of this, which will be what happens in my brain when I look at the memento mori images and when I look at images that are not memento mori images. And while I was in the scanner, I would see commands, text-based commands. You will die was one, and the second is live for now. And after each command, I would see an image, and it might be a memento mori image, or it might be an image that was a painting of a very much alive person. So you'd got these two different sorts of images displayed, and these two very different statements, and they would be displayed almost randomly to me. And then I noticed there were a couple of images that were very ambivalent for me. And they were the memento mori images where you'd got a very alive part of the face and then the skull.
Yes.
And it was a real kind of flip-flop sort of series of thoughts that went through my mind as I looked at one part or the other part of the image. The other set of, a second set of experiments that we did were around what's going on in the brain when I contemplate death. So to do that, I worked with Zoran Josipovic from NYU, and he trained me to do a Buddhist death meditation, which is a sort of simulation of your own death. You kind of imagine that you're dying right now, and from your feet are going numb, you can't feel your legs, etc. what do I feel angry about if I'm to die right now? I had stuff to do, people to see, projects to make. It was, I had things I really wanted to do, and I felt angry that I wasn't going to get to do those things. I'd be really sad about not having time with my husband and breakfast with him especially. And I also got the sense then of how much I'd miss sort of being in my body, like the feeling of sunshine on your face, or through that whole process I really didn't have any extraneous thoughts coming in. I was just very much feeling my body get quieter and colder.
When you're thinking about your death, doesn't really matter what image you're seeing, your brain is telling you that you're feeling disgust. Your disgust area of the brain's lighting up. Could be one interpretation of what's going on.
So the other phrase is live the now. So you're not seeing the same...
No, this is comparing the focusing on your death versus focusing on live the now.
That's really interesting.
You get the disgust area of the brain lighting up, or the body recognition area of the brain lighting up.
So right from the beginning of the project, I'd imagined that what I would produce as an artwork through this process of contemplating my own death would be an object, and it was going to be a kind of homage almost to that object I'd seen at the Wellcome Trust. So it was going to be a life-size head of a woman. It was going to be a self-portrait. It was going to be of me. And it was going to be produced using data. So it was going to be produced using the mathematical data from the MRI scans. So my head would be cut away to reveal my skull and brain. And then the side of my face that was looking alive would be produced using facial scanning, 3D facial scanning.
After obtaining the MRI data, we fed it through various medical imaging softwares to generate a 3D model of the brain, and then the brain is cleaned up and scaled to life size. The 3D face scan had undergone several print tests on household desktop-grade 3D printers before sending it to final production.
One of the things that I was interested in with the 3D printing was, do we understand the data differently if we actually see it as a three-dimensional object? In order to test and develop ways of 3D printing from MRI, which my team and I hadn't done before, we printed on a fairly cheap, low-resolution printer to begin with. And that way we could test out what the sculptural look of the object might be when we cut it and recombined it. For the final exhibited 3D sculpture, the one we actually project the video onto, we used a much higher resolution printer. So there's a lot more detail, and the surface is much, much smoother than in our test. The wireline animation that then goes to flat facet and then through to fully rendered is deliberately retro. It's meant to look like 1990s animation. One of the sequences that's projected onto the brain is taken from MRI tomography, so a series of images captured in real time while I was in the scanner that shows my brain activity using different colours for different active areas of the brain. The procedural animations are made not by sculpting in 3D, but actually writing a simple program in Blender that allows the animation to unfold on the surface of the object. And the live action video was shot in a television studio against a green screen, and that's my living face as opposed to a series of stills.